We are live. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Unfiltered Report. My name is Ryan, and before we go any further, I would just like to extend my sincerest thanks and gratitude to everyone that is part of the Unfiltered Report family. It's hard to believe that this is episode 56, meaning that up until now, there have been 55 episodes and none of those episodes would be possible without all of the amazing people that make up this beautiful family. Whether it's the stars of these episodes, which I always like to say, there's no hierarchy or there's no depth chart. There are no stars and role players and whatnot. Like everybody is a superstar, and everybody brings their own unique perfection to these. And so none of this would be what it is up until now and what it will be continuing moving forward without all of these amazing people. And that also goes without saying that in addition to all of these amazing people who've been on up until now on these recordings, um, a big sincere thanks and gratitude also goes to those who have yet to come on but will in the future. Those who listen to these, whether I know you or I don't, doesn't matter. I just can't thank you all enough for that. Um, and I just really would also like to say as well before we go any further, and a couple of housekeeping notes will follow as well. But I'd also just like to say that to anybody, whether we know each other or not, whether you've been on or not, from here on out, if I would also like to really extend this and make it known. Please reach out to me. If you know me, call me, text me. If we don't know each other, um, and you want to reach out, you can email the unfiltered report at gmail.com. I promise I will check that email and I will respond if you want to reach out. I would love that. Um, and we can make acquaintances from there and figure things out, because what I would like to say is to anybody who would like to come on and do these, whether it's by themselves or with a group of people. I don't even have to be there. For example, I really would, if anyone wants to do any type of articles, maybe you like to write and you want to write about something, or you want to do video content that whatever it is, you have my not only my blessing, but I would really please, I would I would like to extend that out there. So please reach out if that's anything that you can call it whatever you want. And it could be a recurring thing, volume one through whatever, and you can just upload it through the unfiltered report. You can either send it to me and I'll do it, or figure out some way can give you some sort of access and you can do it. We'll figure that out as we get there. But please, um, whether it's audio, video, written, combination of all of them, and however often you'd like to do them, please don't hesitate to do so. In addition to which, as I mentioned, there are a couple of housekeeping items that I would like to knock off as well. Um, in between the episode that we did last week with Vince and then the one with D, Big Nate, and Justin, um, from then until now, I just haven't mentioned it on these recordings. So for anyone who is not currently aware, these will still be uploaded through Substack. So if you're subscribed to them, you'll still get the email notifications. And if you're not subscribed and you find it through Substack, you can listen through it. You can listen to it through Substack, whether you subscribe or not. But in addition to Substack, these are now they get aggregated, onto Spotify and Apple. Um, so if you use either of those or both, you can now listen to these on those apps as well. In addition to that, I mentioned video. That's definitely something we're going to start to try to implement. Not exactly sure when, but some point sooner than later. Probably, I would imagine within maybe the next month or so. Um, with all the, whoever's willing to do that, the recurring guests and those who have yet to be on, we'll continue to do these without video, but we'll do them with video as well. And so, in addition, all of these will then get aggregated. In addition to Spotify and Apple, they'll get aggregated onto YouTube. And then I guess there's also a YouTube podcast, which I didn't know was a thing until maybe about a week ago. But I guess they're two separate things. But all that to say, you can now find the Unfiltered Report in all of these different places, in addition to where you already would get it up until now. Um, so please, by all means, reach out. Let's, definitely looking forward to all of these, recordings and anything else that's in store to come. Um, and again, I just wanted to extend my sincerest thanks and gratitude, and nothing but, I just want to send all my love and thanks. I've got nothing but respect for everyone. Um, and again, this is nothing without all you guys. So thank you so much. And I promise you, this will be one of the very few times that you will have to suffer with just me without any of the amazing people that make the Unfiltered Report what it is. I just wanted to start off by saying all of that and adding those housekeeping notes, uh, and set the stage for where we are at today, because what a day, what a week we've got in store for you, here at the Unfiltered Report. There will be another one of these with one of the amazing team members of the Unfiltered Report later today. So please be on the lookout for that. Um, and then tomorrow we've got some more coming for you. And then hopefully this weekend as well, keeping the ball rolling. Each time better than the last. So as I said, you will not have to suffer without without anyone else and with just me too many times. But part of the reason I wanted to do this, um, what do I want to get into? There are a couple of things I want to get into. As far as this particular recording, however, is going to be catered towards one particular subject. So that way, after this gets done, can tie a bow on it, and then all the amazing people that have been on and will continue to be on, I can get their thoughts on the exact same subject that we're about to talk about today. And then in the other limited times you'll have to suffer without me after we get all this done right now, then can get into something that I've been wanting to get into long before episode one. Even so, this is many, many years in the making, and it's something I've wanted to talk about for a long time. It won't happen in just one particular thing. It'll be an ever evolving thing, but you have to start somewhere. So that'll be after this. Not sure exactly when that one will come. Hopefully, sometime in the next 24 to 48 hours. But sooner than later, you'll have to suffer through another one of these. And that'll be on a different topic, which maybe at the end I'll give a little bit of a sneak peek and preview. But without any further ado, about 8.5 minutes, almost about, what is it, 8 minutes and 26 seconds in. So by the time I'm done, we'll be about 8 minutes and 30 seconds in. We're going to get into the subject that I want to get into today. And that is the NFL draft. I mentioned earlier, we had that episode on Thursday night with D, Big Nate, and Justin, where we kind of had a little bit of a round one as it was playing out, and we talked about it. But as I said then, and as I'll reiterate now, um, it's a much different thing once you get the whole picture of all 7 rounds and then the undrafted free agents as well. So what I'll do is I'll go through the draft itself first and the 7 rounds of the draft, um, especially 2 through 7, because we haven't talked about it from then till now. Identify a couple of teams that kind of stood out. I know the draft isn't an exact science, and you never know how it's going to play out. And I, for one, will be the first to say I will never bat 1,000. I'll get probably a fair amount of these wrong, but that's not the purpose. But what I'll do is, something I've done my whole life. The only difference is it'll be on the record. So we'll see. We'll see how exactly it plays out. I wish I could tell you, but I'm gonna do the best that I can to go team by team. I'll identify a couple of teams at the beginning in no particular order that really stood out to me. Some of the picks and just why my rationale of why I think that's the case. But even maybe, even there might be some teams that maybe I won't talk about at the beginning per se, but I'll go team by team and I'll identify picks from each team that stood out to me for one reason or another, whether it's one or multiple, and why I think those picks stood out. And then I'll then go to the undrafted free agents, and then that from when we get to the undrafted free agents, I'll just go in alphabetical order. I'll run through. That one won't take as long, but I'll go through that and identify a couple of players that didn't get drafted that I think have a pretty solid chance of perhaps not even making the team, but making an impact on those teams, and why I feel that way. Which is all to say and set up again that from here on out, um, it's not the only time we're going to talk about this. It's just the first time. Um, so, without further ado, getting the ball rolling. There are, as I mentioned, a couple of teams that really stood out to me. I'll break them up into a couple of different tiers. There are two teams in particular that I want to start with, and then everything from there on will be in no particular order. But there are two teams that really stood out to me, and I promise on my own life that I've never uttered these words of what I'm about to utter before with these two particular teams in any other prior draft. But as we've come on here before, two things can always be true at once. So what's been true in the past does not have to be true in the present and in the future. Things are always subject to change. Um, and so just because you've been maybe ass, or mediocre, or whatever word you want to use for many years does not mean you always have to be. And just because you've had a lot of success doesn't mean you're guaranteed and entitled to have that success in the future. You constantly, in sports as in life, you know, uh, you have good moments, you have bad moments, you have good stretches and bad, all of which is to say that these two teams that I'm going to highlight are teams that I have been probably either apathetic towards or hard on or made fun of for many years in my life and probably shouldn't have or maybe should have. All of which is to say that these two teams, without having the success in my lifetime, at the very least, if not in their entire existence, depending on how far you want to go back. And the second team will highlight they've had past success. The first one, maybe not as much. Um, but I think things are on the right path and the trajectory is on the right path. And then using those two teams, I'll then springboard to a couple other teams. And then that's when we'll just kind of, it'll be a free fall if it hasn't already. And I apologize in advance. 13 minutes in, gonna lock in here, as the cool kids say. And the first team I'd like to highlight is the Cleveland Browns. So, with all that context, I mentioned the Browns for as long as I've been alive, and for the majority of those years, I've watched football. Um, the Browns have always been a laughing stock. Sadly, they have a passionate fan base. The dog pound always represents that stadium. It's always one of the hardest places to play, no matter what the Browns' record is. Um, whether they've got paper bags over their heads or not, it's always a great atmosphere there, and that's a fan base that deserves a winning football team. The closest that they've sniffed it in my lifetime was the Baker Mayfield team during that COVID stretch, and then as history has many people have talked about. They went out and they got Deshaun Watson. Baker Mayfield's now in Tampa Bay, and they were asked many years before that, haven't had much success since. But as we talked about on Thursday, even before rounds 2 through 7, last year the Browns, notwithstanding, anything else and team success that they had, I thought the draft they had last year was incredible. And, going out and getting Harold Fandon Jr., who's going to be one, if not already, but will continue to be on the upward trajectory of one of the best tight ends in the league. Quinshon Judkins and Dylan Sampson. The fact they got not only one but both of those guys. Carson Schlesinger on defense, the first round pick that they got, Mason Graham, and that Travis Hunter trade, which we'll talk about that later. Um, but with the Browns, I mean, that was a really great draft last year, and that was probably the first time that I had found myself saying that in my entire life. And I wasn't sure what they were going to do for an encore with that. A lot had transpired even from then until now. Kevin Stefanski's gone. In comes Todd Monken. Before the draft, even long before the draft, when that coaching hiring process was taking place, I know there were a lot of people that were maybe not super thrilled with the Todd Monken hire in media circles. At least I'm not. I can only speak for what I've seen. I'm not sure how many people felt that way. Um, but I know there was a lot of rhetoric out there, that the Browns were trying to go after some of these young up and coming offensive coaches. And maybe the media portrayal of it was that the Browns were getting turned down by a lot of these candidates, and then maybe they had to settle with Todd Monken. I think that was the narrative. In my opinion, I wanted to keep an open mind. Todd Monken, offensive coordinator with the Ravens for these last couple years with Lamar Jackson. John Harbaugh gets fired, goes to the Giants. Todd Monken's kind of floating out there. He's familiar with the division. He's a first time head coach. Yes, he's quote unquote older, but that doesn't mean anything to me. Age is just a number in that context of being a football coach and a first time head coach. Um, and so I wanted to keep an open mind there with that head coaching hire and see what they would do in the draft. I figured ahead of the draft that they would be a prime candidate to trade down, which is what they did. They traded down with the Chiefs. They swapped. They went down to pick 9. We'll talk about the Chiefs later as one of those teams that stood out as well. But on Brown specifically, they trade down. They get Spencer Fano, and then with their second first round pick, they took Casey Concepcion. We talked about that on day one. After that, hey, you're thinking, whoa, holy smokes, that's not a bad start for Cleveland. But I'm curious to see how this is going to play out. And I can tell you Friday and Saturday, nothing's changed from Friday, Saturday to right now when we're talking about this. I think they absolutely crushed the draft. And I would go so far as to say that they outdid and one up themselves from what they did last year. And obviously, a lot will happen from now until then. But I just think what they did on day 2 and day 3 was spectacular. The fact that they were able to end up with Denzel Boston in addition to Casey Concepcion, if they would have, like I said, with Judkins and Sampson last year, like if you get one of those guys, you're happy. And they got both. The fact that they got Concepcion and Denzel Boston is miraculous to me. And then on top of that, you're getting Emmanuel McNeil Warren, who we talked a little bit about, but maybe not as in depth. But we threw his name out there a couple of times before the draft as someone that I really liked. And the fact that they were able to get him in the later part of the second round, on top of Spencer Fano, Casey Concepcion, and Denzel Boston, at that point, the brain's going, holy crap. And that's one hell of a draft. They get Austin Barber out of Florida, continue to add some beef onto that offensive line, and then they start day 3. And this is where this is where my brain starts to just combust. They go out and they get 2 Alabama guys. They get Parker Brailsford, the center, who I think will end up being a starter for them when it's all said and done. I think, part of the reason why maybe he goes round 5, and we'll talk about this, a lot of guys, just because they get drafted day 2, day 3, doesn't mean that they're bad players. In many cases, these are the players that end up being some of the best players in the league. And there are a lot of examples of that. And not to use Parker Brailsford specifically as that example, because we're going to continue to go into this, but I'm just setting it up for that was the first pick they made on day 3. And then adding Justin Jefferson, not the wide receiver out of LSU, but the linebacker out of Alabama. These are 2 really good football players that you're taking to start day 3. And then they took 2 tight ends, one in the 5th, one in the 7th. Joe Royer out of Cincinnati, and then Carson Ryan out of BYU. 2 guys who, on top of what you already have in Harold Fannin Jr., only make that position group stronger. So you've beefed up your offensive line, you've beefed up your defense, you've added two tight ends and two wide receivers to an already existing group of Quinshon Judkins, Dylan Sampson, Harold Fannin Jr., and then the cherry on top, talked about this guy a little bit, but we're gonna, that's what I'm really gonna say. My guy Taylor Green, and with the first pick of the sixth round, when they took him, you know, I mean that was when my brain really just went, it exploded, and I started thinking, well, okay, that's the fourth quarterback that they're gonna have on the roster. They took Dylan Gabriel and Shador Sanders last year. They still got Deshaun Watson. Post draft, you know how these things go. They're not going to tip their hand. The Browns are going to say, okay, we're committed to all four. We're going to keep all four. We're going to head into camp with all four. We'll see what happens there. But then you start, the wheels of the machination in the brain start to think. And, on Taylor Green specifically, I've said, I really want to acknowledge this because I know we talked about it with D in his debut when we were spreading some propaganda at long last. Um, and we talked a little bit about Taylor Green and Trinidad Chambliss and that Ole Miss Arkansas game specifically. But I really wanted to kind of go further in depth on Taylor Green real quick. Uh, Obviously, this won't be the only time we'll talk about it, but just to kind of set the stage, like, this is a guy I honestly can't believe it went in the sixth round. I can believe it, but I can't believe it, if that makes sense. And I think him going to Cleveland this is why I like that caveat of saying, as much as I like to talk about these things before they happen, after it happens is when it all kind of takes on a new form. Because before the draft, maybe a couple months ago or whatever it is, if we're having this conversation and you say, "Well, hey, what do you think?" And you say then, "Hey, Taylor Green's going to the Browns," you might, I don't know about that. I don't know how I like that. Maybe he'd be better off. Uh, in a different organization where he can take his time and develop. Um, maybe, I mean, I wasn't expecting it to happen, but I would have said maybe like a team like the Rams, where, McVay's there, Stafford's there, the Eagles, maybe even the Ravens we mentioned earlier with Todd Monken. Uh, Obviously, Todd Monken being gone, but with Lamar Jackson there, you start thinking, well, maybe that would have made or the Packers, somewhere where there's no pressure, just develop and we'll figure it out. But now Taylor Green gets drafted to the Browns. And as that happens, having all this other context of all these other players that they've drafted, adding to what they already have, which is a great defense from last season, that's probably going to be just as good, if not better, with some of these guys that they added in the draft. And you're adding Taylor Green into this quarterback room. The Browns obviously made no secret before the draft. They wanted to bring in another quarterback in some capacity. And I think this pick just makes too much sense for the reasons that I'll make. From Taylor Green specifically, I think the upside's undeniable, in my opinion. I know a lot of people might disagree. I really don't care about that, to be honest with you. I'll ride or die with this. I really will. Whether it works out or not, who knows? But I really think that that's a spectacular pick, and I like Shador Sanders a lot more, probably than most. I think Shador could definitely be a starter in the NFL. The fact they got both of those guys, uh, I think one of those two guys, at the very least, can finally maybe step into that quarterback role. But I really think with Taylor Green, I mean, I think everything. Him going in the second, not in the second round, the sixth round. I'm on record on text messages that I can go in and screenshot and post, upload as a thumbnail one of these days. I thought he could, earlier in the season, before they lost 10 games in a row, I really thought he could have been a first round quarterback. And, a lot's been written, he should move to wide receiver, Terrell Pryor back in the day, or Logan Thomas, who's a tight end. I'm old enough that even though I was really young, I was probably in elementary school, around that, early middle school, whatever, when those guys were around. But I'm old enough to know that there's a big difference between Taylor Green, Terrell Pryor, and Logan Thomas. I watched Terrell Pryor and Logan Thomas back in the day, and I never really thought they were great quarterbacks, tremendous athletes. Both ended up being, great NFL players at different positions. Terrell Pryor had one really good wide receiver year. Logan Thomas made out a pretty good career for himself as a tight end. Um, but I never felt that Taylor Green should change positions. I really think that he's a quarterback. I think he can make throws that none of those guys or neither. He makes some throws that, I mean, at Arkansas he made some throws that, I mean, just if you watch the tape, I mean, you can't coach those sort of throws. And a lot of I think, in many ways, we also mentioned Anthony Richardson. Like, I think in many ways, he's kind of what people wanted Anthony Richardson to be. And I think he got docked because I think in the scouting, the way scouting works in a professional context, a lot of times, and we've mentioned maybe this before with too many cooks in the kitchen, and that's one part of it. But I think the other part of player evaluation, and we'll continue to talk about this not only with football, but with other sports, is when it comes to player evaluation and you're getting paid to do player evaluation, you're always taught, not always, but you're geared toward you're looking at flaws a lot of times, and you're critiquing the things that you don't like. And sometimes what that does is it detracts from what is actually there and what is positive and what's staring you right in the face. And when you throw in all these different, numbers and and not, maybe not in Taylor Green's case specifically, but with other players we'll mention, maybe where the measurables don't line up and they're not the fastest and they're not the strongest, but the eye test is there. Like, sometimes I think a lot of teams, regardless of the sport, make this shit really complicated for no reason. And I listen, I'm not a paid professional by any means. I never have been, but my player evaluation process is something that I really don't think I could ever explain. And I think that's probably why I don't have a job in that industry of any of these different sports, is because I don't think I could explain it to you with like an analytical, spreadsheet, or having been an athlete. So I don't have either of those to draw on. I just have, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, I've watched all of these different sports countless hours. And, you combine that with, no fancy analytics, just the numbers that stare you right in the face. And that's kind of how, and you put all these different things together and you don't make it complicated, and you just, some players you like, some you don't, some you like more than others. And that's just how it goes. And you hit some and you don't. All of which is to say that there will be a lot of people out there before the draft and maybe now onwards that will give you a million reasons why Taylor Green will never work out at quarterback and why he should change positions. But I'll give you a million reasons why Cleveland did in my opinion, one of the smartest things in the draft in taking him with the first pick of the sixth round. Obviously, you can never have too many quarterbacks, but I think the tools that he has, the throws that he can make, the athleticism, the runs. I mean, it's like a freaking gazelle out there. He gets 3-4 yards a stride with with how, he, you know, when he ran probably the best 40. I don't care about the 40, but when he ran the 40 and he had the combine, all of a sudden it was like, oh, this guy's athletic. Shit. If you watch the tape, you see it without needing any of those numbers. And yes, I know the turnovers were a problem and the completion percentage wasn't that high, and they lost a lot of games and blah, blah, blah. Ignore all of that. I always think when it comes to quarterbacks, I think sometimes uh, I listen. I know turnovers, winning that turnover margin is the name of the game. I get it, but I've always been someone. I think I would much rather have someone. You can limit turnovers, and you might never fully mitigate it, but you can limit it. Like Josh Allen's a great example. When Josh Allen was coming out of Wyoming, and it's not like, there's obviously Josh Allen went in the first round, Taylor Green went in the sixth, but in the same sense where the tools were all there with Josh Allen, you needed to see it develop, and he did. And if he's not the best, he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And the last game that he played with that lost to Denver in the playoffs, he had what was it, 4 turnovers in that game, and that was probably the best 4 turnover game you'll ever see in your entire life. And they should have won that game, and they didn't, and that's how it goes. But all of which is to say, I think sometimes we look at turnovers too much as well, where you have to look at the context of all these different things. We use Arkansas this past season as a great example. Yes, they went 2-10 and they lost 10 games in a row. But if you dive into the games and you actually watch those games and you go back and you can watch these games you can find them on YouTube. You can fast forward through whatever you don't want to watch. They were in pretty much every game that they played in the first 9 games of the season. And through the first 8 games of the season, he was number one in the country in total yards per game. So not only are the physical measurables there, the eye test is there, but it's not like the statistical part of it wasn't there. There's 4 years of him starting, 2 at Boise, 2 at Arkansas. Um, we mentioned Anthony Richardson, where he only had 1 year of starting. Um, and they're the same age, by the way. But I just think with Taylor Green specifically, not to have gone on a whole tangent about that, but I just think that pick specifically, him coming from Arkansas, having been coached by Bobby Petrino for the last 2 years. Lamar Jackson was coached by Bobby Petrino at Louisville. Lamar Jackson's offensive coordinator. Todd Monken is now the head coach of the Browns. I'm not saying that Taylor Green is Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. I think Taylor Green is Taylor Green. And whether it pans out or not, what I'm trying to say is I think that he can be one of the best quarterbacks in the league. I think that guy could, whether it's him or Shador or anybody else, I think Taylor Green's gonna make the team. He'll be on the 53-man roster. We'll figure out what they do with a guy like Dylan Gabriel. Uh, we'll see. Maybe they flip him somewhere else, or maybe they keep all 4 of them. They put one of them on the practice squad. But I just think Taylor Green coming in, new regime with Todd, not new regime, but new coaching staff with Todd Monken. I think if Todd Monken can go in there and tweak a couple of things and fine tune what's there, and Taylor Green, from all what you read and hear, has got the work ethic and the character. He's got all the natural ability, and he can throw it better than all these other guys that we've thrown out of, like the Terrell Pryors and the Logan Thomases, and let the tape speak for itself ultimately. But I just think that's the perfect situation. And even without Taylor Green, I don't want to, you know, Casey Concepcion and Denzel Boston, those 2 guys, both of them are going to be spectacular additions for the Browns. Emmanuel McNeil Warren, Parker Brailsford, Justin Jefferson, Spencer Fano, obviously, and Austin Barber. I mean, they crushed every pick that they made. And however it pans out, we'll see. But Cleveland, make me look good. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, Cleveland Browns. That was one of the 2 teams I wanted to highlight. And then I want to go to the second team now. And we talked a little bit about this team on day one with D, Big Nate, and Justin. But then, similar to the Browns, day 2, day 3 come along. And as the picks are playing out, I'm going, holy smokes. And my brain starts to go, whoa, wow, I like what they're doing here. And I want to shout out the Miami Dolphins. The Miami Dolphins started off round 1. They had 2 picks. They took Caden Proctor out of Alabama. When that pick happened, they had traded down 1 spot with the Cowboys, who got Caleb Downs. And I know the media part will focus on the Cowboys part and Caleb Downs, but I thought what Miami did, moving down a spot, taking Caden Proctor, we said it then, and it only amplified day 2 and 3. Part of why I liked that pick at the time, Caden Proctor notwithstanding, but just the positional emphasis of it is Miami has always been a team. when even as recently as the Mike McDaniel teams, flashy, they're fast, they can score a lot of points, but you put them in cold weather and they can't do squat. That playoff game they played in Kansas City, the game they played in Green Bay a couple of years ago after Thanksgiving or on Thanksgiving. Um, and some of the players even came out after a couple of those seasons and said, like, look, we gotta get tougher, we gotta get more physical. We will in these cold weather games. We can play when it's hot and sunny or it's in a dome, and all the conditions are great, but the knock on the Dolphins has been they're not a tough physical football team. Mike McDaniel's gone. He's now with the Chargers. They bring in a new GM, new head coach, John Eric Sullivan, and Jeff Hafley, both coming over from Green Bay. Jeff Hafley, by the way, interesting tidbit that I don't think gets talked about enough is that he was the head coach at Boston College, steps down from Boston College, leaves that job in order to become the defensive coordinator of the Packers, which is something that not a lot of people would do, but he ends up leaving that job, going to the Packers, becoming their defensive coordinator, and goes from the defensive coordinator of the Packers to the head coach of the Miami Dolphins. So I think that's an interesting tidbit worth making note of. But we mentioned that Miami Green Bay game a couple years ago. What better way to change your culture and redefine a new era of the Miami Dolphins than to bring in two guys from Green Bay who know what it's like to build cold weather, top nose football teams. And so I was interested to see what they were going to do. I was, similar to with, Todd Monken, the only difference being is the Browns front office remained the same, whereas the Dolphins, it's a new first year general manager, new front office. They go out, they take Caden Proctor, and then with their second first round pick, they take Chris Johnson out of San Diego State, one of my favorite corners in this draft. Um, so that was similar to the Browns with Spencer Fano and Casey Concepcion. Hey, great start. But let's see how day two, day three go. Day two, day three roll around. Everyone that we talked about the draft with before the draft highlighted Jacob Rodriguez. I'll let that speak for itself on the tape. I was very interested to see where he was going to go. He ends up with the Dolphins. They end up getting his teammate out of Texas Tech with their next selection, Caleb Douglas, out of Texas Tech. 2 years at Florida, 2 years at Texas Tech, two very productive, similarly productive seasons at Texas Tech. Then in the third round, they go out and get Will Kazmarek, who, yes, if you look at the stats and the box scores or whatever, and you say, why did they take that guy in the third round? There's not much production there as a tight end. I'll tell you why. He's going to be an absolute weapon in the run game. Dude can block his ass off, adding to that physical presence that we're trying to talk about. Caden Proctor, Jacob Rodriguez on defense. Now you go out and you get a big 6'4" wide receiver out of Texas Tech, and now you get this big guy out of Ohio State at tight end who's going to be a menace in the run game for you. And then they go out with their last third round pick of the day and they get Chris Bell out of Louisville, an incredibly productive player this past season, over 900 yards receiving. He's going to come in motivated, having gotten drafted that late in the third round. And then they start day three. They take Trey Moore out of Texas a couple years ago at UTSA. This is a guy who had 13, 14 sacks. A couple productive years for Texas, not nearly as productive as that 1 year at UTSA, but in the fourth round, great selection. And then they go out and they get Kyle Lewis, who I'll go here on record and I will say very well. I mean, steal of the draft, if not steal of the draft, one of the steals of the draft. There are many of them. He's one of them. Getting him that late in the fourth round is an absolute miracle. He's going to plug in right away for Jeff Hafley on defense. I don't care what he's listed as a linebacker and a safety. With the Dolphins, he's listed as a linebacker at the moment. I don't really care what he plays. The dude is everywhere. Wherever the football is, he's there. And then in the fifth round, they get Michael Taffy. Michael Taffy's what we were talking about earlier is the anti-Taylor Green, but the same thought process. I mean, two things can be true at once. Where Michael Taffy, might not be the biggest, might not be the fastest guy in the world, But this is a guy, I promise you, in 5, 10 years, you're going to look back and say, how the hell did they get that guy in the fifth round? He's going to be a big time player for them on defense. And then again, on Kyle Lewis, the shark playing for the Finns, Kyle Lewis is a beast. I can't believe he went that late in the fourth round. He could have been, at the very least, the second round pick, and I would have had no problem with that. Him going that late in the fourth round. And then we mentioned, a repeated theme, getting Jacob Rodriguez and this guy. Come on now. Come on now. That's a culture defining draft. And then we haven't even finished yet. Kevin Coleman Jr., he played 4 years, 4 teams. He starts his career out at Jackson State playing for Deion Sanders. He goes all over the place. He goes Louisville, Mississippi State, Missouri, 2 really good years back to back in the SEC for 2 different teams. You might look at it numbers wise and say the numbers dipped, but the context is that we mentioned, with Taylor Green, you have to look at the context of a lot of these things. I didn't even mention with Taylor Green, by the way. This is the scatterbrain part we mentioned about a year ago. With the turnovers, the context of your offense, you have to go out there and you got to score 30, 40 points a game. You're going to take a lot more chances and turn the ball over a lot more. And now with the defense like the Browns and not Arkansas, that's another part of that conversation. But then going back to Kevin Coleman, you might look at it, hey, from 900 yards, he's going down to about 700 yards. What happened? Well, Bo Pribula gets hurt. If in the Vandy game, if you look at the Vandy game and anything before the Vandy game, he was playing probably better than he was playing the year before at Mississippi State. And he might even end up being, out of Caleb Douglas and Chris Bell, he could be the best out of all three of them. All three of those guys are really good, by the way. I don't know. It doesn't matter which one of them is going to be the best. They got three of those guys. So you got three really good wideouts. You've got a nasty run blocking tight end. You've got a culture setter on defense in Jacob Rodriguez, and then another culture setter on defense in Kyle Lewis, and then another culture setter in the secondary in Michael Taffy in the fifth round. The last pick of the fifth round, you get another tight end out of Mississippi State in Sado Traore. You take a guard out of Texas and DJ Campbell, and then a guy in the seventh round probably could have even gone a round or 2 or 3 earlier in Max Llewellyn out of Iowa. All of this to say, first-year general manager John Eric Sullivan, first-year head coach Jeff Hafley. I'm very intrigued to see how that plays out with what I think on paper is about as good of a draft as you can have. So now we're going to open this up to a couple of other teams whose drafts I think really stood out. The Tennessee Titans were one team as well. I think a couple of the first 4, 5 picks that they made, and actually even more than that, really stood out to me. Malik was talking about the Cardinals, and we talked a lot about the Cardinals last Thursday during round 1, them taking Jeremiah Love. I think, and I'll set this up with where I'm going, I think Jeremiah Love and the Cardinals taking Jeremiah Love maybe did the Titans a favor, and I'll explain why. Them getting Carnell Tate at 4, you get to add him to the wide receiver room. Alec Ayamanor, Chimere Dike. I'm interested to really see how that first year Bob Sala and Big Bob Sala and Brian Dable, them both ex-New York head coaches in tandem working together now. I really am very intrigued to see how that goes. I think Cam Ward, we talked about it last year. Nothing's really changed of how I feel about Cam Ward. I'm still really high on him. And I think Brian Dable gives Cam Ward a much better shot than anything he had in his rookie year. So you go out, you get Carnell Tate, their second first round pick, Keldrick Falk out of Auburn. I thought was a spectacular pick. In the second round, you go out, you get Anthony Hill Jr. out of Texas, tackling machine, over 100 tackles 2 years ago for Texas. And then Wu Pig Sui, Arkansas is getting a lot of love from an LSU guy. Fernando Carmona, getting him in the fifth round blows my mind. He might have been my favorite guard in the entire class. That's another one of those steals of the draft. Kyle Lewis. We're going to throw a lot of guys out there as well that I'm going to throw in that similar category. Fernando Carmona, plug and play immediately, and the interior of that offensive line is going to really help them out. It's going to be a starter there for the Tennessee Titans. And then going out and getting Nicholas Singleton. This was an interesting one to me, in the sense that I think similar theme context really matters. Him and his teammate Katron Allen at Penn State, those two guys were a duo for 4 years together at Penn State. And both of those guys would start and get 90 plus percent of the snaps on 95 plus percent of the rest of the teams in the country. But those two guys being together, not only for 1 year, but for four, both of those guys, great backs in completely different ways. And last year's running back class, we didn't talk about the draft as much last year at the time, but going back, that heading into it on paper was, I mean, that was like the mother load of running backs. And that was without Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen declaring for the draft, which beforehand really thought they would. And I think they both would have had probably a pretty good shout to go day two and what was a really good running back class without them. But they had the heartbreaking loss in the college football playoff to Notre Dame. They both decided they wanted to come back for one more year, try to make a run for a national championship. Year doesn't go out the way that both of them want, and maybe because of that, people forget about these two guys. But Nicholas Singleton, who prior to the season probably would have been by most media members, probably would have been thrown out there as a guy in a similar tier as Jeremiah Love and those guys, getting him in the fifth round. And then Katron Allen goes in the sixth round to the Commanders. We'll talk about them later. Um, but we'll talk about this a lot, where, maybe certain players don't have as productive of seasons and, maybe teams forget about the production that they've had in the past. I always like to say, if you've seen it do them once, they can do it again. You just have to get it out. So I thought that was a really good pick in the fifth round. And then Pat Coogan out of Indiana. We'll highlight a lot more of these Indiana guys, but getting him, another guy you can kind of plug in on that offensive line in the sixth round. I thought they did pretty well for themselves. Obviously, D mentioned on Thursday, death taxes, and then the Ravens and the Eagles getting stroked into oblivion. In this case, totally fair and valid. We'll start with the Ravens first, alphabetical order and whatnot. We highlighted their day one pick going on the interior of the offensive line. Second round, they got to get Zion Young. Zion Young was born to play for the Ravens. You hear me say this a couple of other times with a couple of different players, but Zion Young, born to play for the Ravens, is going to beef up that pass rush immediately. Then they go out in the third round. They get Jacoby Lane out of USC. The fact they're getting him in the third round is incredible value. And then on top of that, they kick off day three, taking Elijah Surratt. So similar theme, getting not only one, but both of those guys. Remarkable business by the Ravens. They took two tight ends, Matthew Hibner out of SMU, Josh Cuevas out of Alabama. Sandwich in between that is a guy who I think is another steal for them in the fifth round, Chandler Rivers. And then their last fifth round selection, Adam Randall, is an interesting case. This is a guy who, 4-year player at Clemson, 3 years as a wide receiver. They convert him to a running back this past season for his final year. 800 yards, over 800 yards rushing. Had a couple of good games. I think he's an interesting guy to keep an eye on because he's still learning the position. And for a guy who was a first-year running back, you could tell there were some he had some moments where you could tell it was his first time playing the position. But, the talent, the size, the athleticism is there. At that juncture in the fifth round, absolutely worth the stab. They got their punter out of Michigan State to replace the punter that they lost going to the Giants, Jordan Stout. So all in all, Ravens, typical business. And then the Eagles, who got arguably my favorite tight end, out of coming into the draft. I'll highlight a couple other the tight ends that I really liked, who outside of Eli Stowers, were either day three or undrafted, ironically. But Eli Stowers been my guy for quite a while, even when he was at New Mexico State with Diego Pavia. Those two guys coming over together, really, really changing the trajectory of Vanderbilt moving forward. We'll talk about that at a later date, and we'll talk about Pavia later as well. But obviously, a lot's been said about Mekhi Lemon to the Eagles, but then following that up, getting Eli Stowers, and then adding Markel Bell out of Miami, who's going to plug right away on that offensive line, and then going out day three. We talked about the Browns, Taylor Green, four quarterbacks. Uh, Everyone's favorite general manager in the media, Howie Roseman, is on record. They asked, "Hey, why do you take Cole Payton?" Well, you can never have too many quarterbacks. This is a team that um, traded for Andy Dalton, still have Tanner McKee. Similar to the Browns, where will they keep four or not? We'll see. You can never have too many quarterbacks, but if they don't keep four, as we mentioned, maybe Dylan Gabriel becomes a guy who gets flipped, so the Browns can move forward with Deshaun Watson, Shador Sanders, and Taylor Green. The Eagles, maybe they flip Tanner McKee, keep Andy Dalton as their backup for the year, let Cole Payton develop. They asked Howie Roseman, and they asked everyone's favorite coach Sirianni as well. Why'd you guys like this guy? So you can take their word for it if you don't want to take mine. Cole Payton, even though he's a 1 year starter, definitely worth the stab in the fifth round. He can really move. He's a lefty quarterback, but he can really move. He can run. Uh, Never hurts, to add a guy like that into your room and see if you can develop him. Ironically, Jalen Hurts takes over for a North Dakota State quarterback. Now there's a North Dakota State quarterback waiting in the wings. They also, I thought, in round seven, getting a guy like Cole Wisniewski out of Texas Tech in the secondary. You're not going to find a guy like that at safety in the seventh round. I mean, you will. I mean, it has happened, but in the sense that it's remarkable that a guy like that is available to get him in the seventh round. He's a guy who will make the team. And then they took this dude out of Nigeria who I had never heard before until the draft, but it comes out of the NFL player pathway program, and the raw testing numbers alone are worth the stab in the seventh round. So we'll see how that plays out. You lose nothing at that point, but for a guy who's 6'4", over 300 pounds, and a low 4'6", 40, almost a 40-inch vertical, and just shy under 11 feet in the broad jump, I sound like Mel Kiper Jr. because I couldn't give a stuff about any of those numbers and how I personally evaluate players, which is going back to what we talked about earlier. But in this case, in the seventh round, with that type of player, it's worth the stab. The Raiders, we mentioned the Raiders earlier on day one. Obviously them getting Mendoza. Kind of curious to see how they would follow it up. They took a guy in Traden Stooks to kick off their first second round pick of day two. Traden Stooks was a guy who probably, you always hear the term helium as it pertains to drafts. He had a lot of helium in the week leading up to the draft. There was some buzz that maybe he might sneak into the first round. He ends up going pretty high in the second round. Kieran Crawford out of Auburn, really good edge guy to take in the third round, beef up the offensive line with Trey Zoom the third, and then kick off day three with the first pick of day three, getting Jermod McCoy, my guy David's boy Jermod McCoy. This happens every year with some player. It happens every year. You can even slap it down for 2027. It's going to happen again. There's always there's a player, there's some sort of medical concern. Teams get panicked, slides down the draft board. Some team who had no business taking them at the juncture that they get them, takes them. Whatever body part they were worried about ends up holding up just fine, and they end up being great professionals. I feel the same way about Jermod McCoy as all those previous examples and all the future examples. It's an incredible pick to kick off day three. And then they took Wu Pig Sui, Mike Washington Jr. Listen, getting him to pair up with Ashton Genty. Mike Washington Jr.'s got a very rare, unique blend of size and speed. 6'2", over 230 pounds, 220 pounds, however much he weighs. It's a big guy, but he can freaking move. I mean, you turn on the tape, and like I said, I watched a lot of Taylor Green in Arkansas, Fernando Carmona, and this guy Mike Washington. And you watch some of the runs, it's like he should get shot out of a cannon, and nobody touches him for probably 10, 12 yards. Um, Part of that is Taylor Green, part of that is Fernando Carmona, part of that's Mike Washington Jr. They all are three, highlighting those three guys. Mike Washington Jr., listen, outstanding pick in the fourth round in Kubiak's running scheme. You know, the Kubiaks and the Shanahans love to run the football. Mike Washington Jr. is going to fit in perfectly with the Raiders. He's the kind of guy who absolutely can be a 1A, 1B kind of guy. And that's not even a disrespect to Ashton Genty. It's just a shout out to Mike Washington Jr. And then they go out, they take another Arizona DB. They added Trayden Stute. They take Dalton Johnson, and then a pick that I really liked in Hezekiah Masses. That's a guy who had 5 interceptions this past season at Cal. Malik Benson in the sixth round. That's a guy who started at Florida State, goes to Oregon, had a pretty good year. All around, really good draft for the Raiders. Um, we mentioned their division rival, the Chiefs. They had traded up from 9 to 6. The Browns moved down and got Spencer Fano, Mansour Delane out of LSU. Um, we'll talk about the other guy that they drafted out of LSU, and that'll be a side little tangent. But before we get there, Mansour Delane, fantastic pick. He's going to plug in right away and be a big time player for the Chiefs. Outstanding pick for them. Peter Woods, also in the back half of the first round. I love it. R. Mason Thomas. Two great picks on that defensive line. R. Mason Thomas was one of my favorite day two guys heading into the draft. Wasn't surprised to see him go that high in round two, and it was a great landing spot for him. And then they kicked off day three, getting a guy in Jaden Kennedy, who I think is going to be able to move all around that secondary. He's going to fit perfectly in Coach Bagnola's system. And he's going to be one of those guys. You say, how did they get him in the fourth round in a couple of years? Emmett Johnson out of Nebraska. This is a guy who led the country in rushing this past season. Big time player. Getting him in the fifth round is going to add juice into that running game. They added Kenneth Walker. This guy's going to add juice as well. This guy, people will look back as well. They'll say, how the hell did they get this guy in the fifth round? Outstanding pick. Cyrus Allen in the fifth round, wide receiver out of Cincinnati. That's another player that I think will be able to contribute for them for the value that they got him. And then they took Garrett Nussmeier in the seventh round, which if you would have told me before the draft or at any point from before the draft through any point in my lifetime, if you would have told me that Baron Morton and Ethan Kaliakmanis, how the fuck I apologize to him, but the guy out of Rutgers, Kaliakmanis, thank you. Fuck, my apologies to Big Ethan. But if you would have told me that those two guys both got drafted in the seventh round, but if you would have told me that those two guys would have been drafted before Garrett Nussmeier, and then you would have told me that Nussmeier went in the seventh round, I would have told you were crazy. That's another example, I think, of teams probably being scared by the medical. Uh, Similar to Jermod McCoy. But him going to the Chiefs, I think, is the perfect landing spot for him in his career. I honestly, I mentioned him and Taylor Green. Those are the two guys I really felt I wanted to see where they would land, and I think both of those guys ended up in perfect spots for two totally different reasons. Um, I think Nussmeier being able to go there, no pressure whatsoever. Mahomes isn't going anywhere. This is a guy in Garrett Nussmeier. At worst, he's a 5-10 year backup in the league. His dad's the offensive coordinator of the Saints. This is a guy, worst case scenario, has the best job in America, and he's a backup quarterback for 10 years. The Chiefs, ironically, Chase Daniel was the guy. Chase Daniel was the guy I always liked, and we'll talk about a couple of guys later on who I think might fall in that similar category. But as far as Garrett Nussmeier is concerned, I do think I think there's still something there. I think you turn on the tape from 2 years ago, and anytime he played prior to that, whether it's the SEC championship game against Georgia a couple years ago, whether it was the bowl game when the year Jaden Daniels got drafted. Anytime that Garrett Nussmeier had seen the field prior to this past season, I was a big fan of Garrett Nussmeier's. I thought that he was going to, heading into the year, I thought he was going to play himself and be a first round pick. Goes to show you how much I know. Um, but I think him going to the Chiefs, he's going to sling it 30, 40 times a game in at least one preseason game this year. And I look forward to it. And he's a guy, like I said, either he's a backup for the Chiefs. They've got Justin Fields as well. So there's no pressure for Nussmeier. He can just be a sponge, get healthy, get right, get back to himself. And then, like I said, you put him out there in the preseason and he starts balling out and the tape looks good. If a team wants to go trade for him, now the Chiefs are getting a pick back for him that's better than where they drafted him. So either way, I think it's an outstanding pick from the Chiefs, no matter how it plays out, whether he's a backup for them or he's a backup who they flip later on for a future draft pick. Um, Outstanding draft pick, and I think he's going to get right, and I think he's gonna show out in the preseason when he gets the opportunity and he'll be a sponge for 1 year. He'll ball out again year two, and then we'll see how it plays out. But regardless of which, at worst, career backup. And then I mentioned a lot of these picks I like: Mansour Delane, Peter Woods, R. Mason Thomas, Jaden Kennedy, Emmett Johnson. Go down the list. Um, I thought the Chiefs did really good business for themselves. Another team that really stood out to me that I really wanted to talk about long before the draft it's the Jacksonville Jaguars. We mentioned them. I said we would get back to it. We did get back to it. However long ago that was until now. Jacksonville makes that Travis Hunter trade, and I was in year one of James Gladstone's tenure, and I was really fascinated at the time by that, and nothing's changed with James Gladstone. He comes over from the Rams, and this is a guy who, from what it appears, definitely learned a lot from his time with the Rams and had quite a bit of an influence within the Rams as well at the time. This is a guy who I figured would follow a similar blueprint to the Rams, and the Rams. We'll talk about the Rams later, but the Rams have developed a reputation. Fuck them picks. Gets all the fuck them picks gets the headlines and the memes, but the reputation, in my opinion, that the Rams have developed is that they crush day two and day three to draft year in and year out. And they might not have many first round picks. Some years they have more picks. Some years they might not even have a ton of picks, but they always tend to add impact players regardless of how many picks they have or where those picks end up. And you can look up and down the Rams roster, and they've got guys on day three, especially littered up and down that roster that are massive contributors for a team that heads into this upcoming season still really early, probably one of the favorites. But yes, James Gladstone comes over from the Rams to Jacksonville, and I was very fascinated before last year, before they did anything. I was fascinated all throughout last year. Him and Liam Cohen, I think both of them did a spectacular job in year one on the personnel side and the coaching side. I am admittedly, I've never been the biggest Trevor Lawrence guy. I'm still not, but the rest of that roster is spectacular. And, offense and defense, by the way. And so I was very interested to see what James Gladstone would do as a follow up. No day one selections. And this is what I was trying to say earlier. We didn't even talk about Jacksonville on day one because they didn't have any picks. But um, here we are with the Jaguars. And, they kick off their draft. And their first pick that they made is a guy in Nate Borkature. Nate Borkature, Borkature. Sorry, pronunciations are where I struggle. That's my one fatal flaw. So I always apologize to these kids because I always want to get pronunciations right. So if I don't know how to pronounce it or if I butcher it, I apologize in advance. But this dude out of Texas A&M, who you might look at it. We talked about it with the tight end out of Ohio State that got drafted by the Dolphins. This is a guy out of A&M, plays 4 years in Nebraska. Last year at A&M, his most productive pass catching season was this past year at A&M, 19 catches for 198 yards and 3 touchdowns. So you might look at that and say, well, why the hell did they take this guy with their first pick in their draft in with their first pick, which is in the second round, later half of the second round, and it's because this guy's going to be a weapon in the run game. But then I mentioned earlier with the Eagles that Eli Stowers was one of my favorite tight ends heading into the draft. One of my other, 3 or 4 guys that I really liked at the tight end position was the other guy that they took in the fifth round, Tanner Koziel. This is a guy who very productive at Ball State 2 years ago, over 800 yards, over 700 yards this past season at Houston. Uh, and this is a guy who shredded LSU in the bowl game that they played, which I'll have to tangent back to LSU at some point. Maybe, maybe we'll have to, if it doesn't happen today, it'll happen at some point regardless, or maybe later in this conversation. But Tanner Koziel out of Houston smacked that down as one of the steals of the draft. And then they had 2 other steals in the sixth round. They took 2 wideouts, Josh Cameron out of Baylor and CJ Williams out of Stanford. Smack it down. Both of those guys are going to make a big impact for them. Josh Cameron's one of those guys, was always going to be a day 3 guy. Probably the sixth round was where I would have expected him to get taken, but with the caveat being that he would well outproduce that draft slot. This is a guy who can go up and get it. He makes plays. Um, just a productive player. And I think he's going to fit perfectly into that Liam Cohen scheme that they got going on offensively. And then this is where this is the fun part where I can caveat. I would have said Josh Cameron before the draft would have been one of those guys I really wanted to see where he ended up. He goes to Jacksonville. I love it. Not too long after that, about 12 picks later, then they took CJ Williams. I'll be honest, CJ Williams was one of those guys that I kind of forgot was even in the draft. There were so many wide receivers within this draft that I liked that I forgot that he was even there. And I honestly, it's no offense to CJ Williams because I'm about to gas him up a little bit in about 30 seconds. So, I saw that and I mentioned all these things about being a big fan of James Gladstone and what he's doing over there in Jacksonville. And so when they took CJ Williams, it piqued my interest. And so I went back, did my due diligence, kind of, wanted to look into that a little bit more. And I'll have to pick. The Virginia tape alone will speak for itself. If you want to go back, listen, I'm a big fan of both of those picks. So I think them getting Tanner Koziel, Josh Cameron, and then C.J. Williams, and then this Borkature guy in the second round. You get one run blocking tight end, you get a pass catching tight end, and 2 really good wideouts. So I think you're going to plug and play immediately for them. Joining what's already a pretty solid receiving core, but it's going to get even deeper now. A shout out to the Jaguars. A couple of other division teams, Indianapolis. I thought Indianapolis made 2 really good picks to kick off their draft on day 2. CJ Allen at that juncture in the second round, I think, was an incredible value pick. And then shout out AJ Hossey out of LSU. I think this might be a good place to even kind of throw in that LSU tangent because we mentioned, Mansour Delane and Garrett Nussmeier going to the Chiefs. What's interesting about this, this context thing that we were talking about, so Brian Kelly gets fired this past season, didn't pan out for Brian Kelly. And part of the reason why it didn't work out for Brian Kelly, which is just really ironic how these things play out, is prior to this past season, Brian Kelly's LSU teams were similar to what we talked about with Taylor Green and Arkansas. I didn't care as much about the turnovers as maybe other people because you have to look at the context. And so maybe with Garrett Nussmeier heading into this past season, a lot of people would have said, hey, he needs to cut back on the turnovers. I love that shit. I love that he was before this past season, Garrett Nussmeier was out there gunslinging it, and I love that. And then I think heading into this past season, I think part of Brian Kelly's demise was I think, yes, Garrett Nussmeier was never fully healthy, and that really hampered them, and that hampered their offense a lot. And it just so happens that the one year that they invested so much NIL money on the defensive side of the ball, bringing in Mansour Delane from Virginia Tech, and then this AJ Halsey guy out of Houston, transferring to LSU. Listen, this AJ Halsey guy can play. Um, the team at LSU might not have been that good, but it's not because AJ Halsey wasn't a good player. Getting him in the third round, he's going to plug and play immediately for the Colts on that defense. And then them getting Deion Burks with the fourth to last pick of the draft in the seventh round, I think is remarkable. He's a guy who he could have went anywhere day two or day three, and I would have said, hey, you know what, good pick. Um, him going that late in the seventh round, incredible value pick. I think he's going to honestly be able to. He won't. I won't be surprised if he makes an impact for the Colts in some capacity moving forward. Their other division, Houston Texans. They're in the first round. They took Keelan Rutledge. Everybody knows they need some offensive line help desperately. But they made a couple of day three picks that I think really stood out. They made another pick on the offensive line with my guy out of Oklahoma, Wade Woodaz out of Clemson, Kamari Ramsey out of USC, Lewis Bond out of Boston College, and then Aiden Fisher out of Indiana. Especially, I want to highlight Aiden Fisher. This guy's a tackling machine. It's the perfect example of what I'm trying to talk about, where maybe it's not the combine measurables or whatever. I don't care about any of that stuff. The production's there. Over 100 tackles at James Madison for Kurt Signetti. Transfers with Kurt Signetti. Over 100 tackles in Europe, year one with Kurt Signetti. 95 tackles this past season in a national championship. He's going to, again, Houston Super Bowl caliber defense without Aiden Fisher. Aiden Fisher is going to make, not only is he going to make the team, I think he's going to be an impact player for them. And we'll look back and say, how the hell did they get that guy in the seventh round? We're going to, there are a couple other teams I'd like to mention, that we've probably forgotten. Buffalo. I thought Buffalo made a couple of really nice picks. TJ Parker kicking off they traded down a couple of times, traded out of round one. They took him with the third pick of the second round. He's going to plug and play immediately on that defense. And then they also took Davison Igbinosun out of Ohio State to beef up their secondary with their second round selection. But I really like what they did on day three, going out and getting Skylar Bell. If he'll go back in the fall, them getting Khalil Shakir a couple of years back out of Boise State on day three. I had deja vu flashbacks. I think Skylar Bell and Josh Allen are going to have quite the time together. Watch out for that combination moving forward. And then Jalen Kilgore in the fifth round, incredible value there. At this point, we'll just run through alphabetical order for the teams that we have not touched on. Malik mentioned the Cardinals the other day. We talked a little bit about them day one on last Thursday, them taking Jeremiah Love. I said I was interested to see how they would kind of fill in the pieces of that puzzle. I'll be honest, I think it was interesting. I think that's why I like to look at day two and day three. I didn't highlight them in the way that I did a lot of these other teams, partly because of that, not because I don't think they didn't take a couple of good players. I do think the Chase Pasantis pick, being able to plug him in on the offensive line. I like the Reggie Virgil pick out of Texas Tech as well. I think getting him in the fifth round, and then there's an undrafted guy or two out there when we get to that conversation that I think, I liked. I will say, I think, they took Carson Beck with the first pick of the third round. I don't want to, I'm not the biggest Carson Beck guy. I'll be honest. I'll be shocked if he ends up being a long-term quarterback for the Cardinals. I think what the much more likely outcome is with Carson Beck is, he'll get a look this year. Maybe he'll stick around, maybe he won't, but he won't be the long-term quarterback there either way. And then I know I said I'd go alphabetical order, but I realized I forgot to mention the two New York teams, which I wanted to highlight those two New York teams as well. I'll start with the Jets because I think the first four picks that the Jets made were spectacular. David Bailey, Kenyon Sadiq, Omar Cooper Jr., and then getting D'Angelo Pons in the second round. Those four guys alone make for a great draft. They did take Cade Klubnik in the fourth round, similar to what I mentioned with Carson Beck. Not my favorite. I think similar to Carson Beck, much more likely conversation is that similar to Carson Beck, they'll get a look at some point during the year, see what they can do. I hope that they both play well, but I'm not going to bet on it in the same way that I'm maybe vouching for some of these other players. Um, but I think that's no disrespect to Cade Klubnik. I just think that the much more likely outcome is that David Bailey, Kenyon Sadiq, Omar Cooper Jr., D'Angelo Pons, maybe even a guy like Darrell Jackson Jr. So, you go down the list. I think those guys can be impactful players for the Jets moving forward. I think Cade Klubnik, yeah, maybe he'll stick around long term for them as a backup, but I think they'll be getting their franchise guy in 2027. Shout out my guy Armand. We'll be getting his thoughts very soon, so stay tuned for that. Um, and then the Giants, shout out my guy David and Big Ron. We'll be getting their thoughts as well. And then shout out my guy Adam with the Colts. We were talking about that earlier. Um, with the Giants, I thought the Giants had a really good draft. We talked about them on day one a lot, getting Arvell Reese and Francie Mauigoa. They did nothing on day two and day three that dissuaded me from liking their draft. Colton Hood, early on in round two, I thought was spectacular. Going out and getting Malachi Fields, a very rare fifth-year guy who's still only 22 years old, 4 years at Virginia, two incredibly productive years at Virginia. I liked him a lot at Virginia. Last year at Notre Dame, I thought he was pretty solid there as well. I think getting him in the third round, he's going to plug in immediately for the Giants on offense, and he's going to be a big-time contributor for them. And then I think the Jack Kelly pick round six, he'll be a guy that will make the team and will make an impact on that defense. Going back alphabetically, Atlanta, they went out, they took Avion Terrell, family connection there with Avion Terrell, and then they ended up taking Zachariah Branch in the third round. That really stood out to me, Zachariah Branch. The Falcons desperately need some juice outside of Drake London, Kyle Pitts. Zachariah Branch is complete opposite type of receivers, Drake London. Doesn't have to go too far from the University of Georgia to the Atlanta Falcons. I'll be interested to see how that plays out with Kevin Stefanski year one. And then them getting Harold Perkins Jr. in the sixth round. This is a guy I think when you look back at Brian Kelly's tenure, we're going to talk a lot about Brian Kelly and LSU. I'm going to ping pong all over the place, and we'll have to do a proper thing on this and then, Lane Kiffin another time. But with Harold Perkins Jr. specifically, his freshman year, you're thinking this guy's going to be a top five, top 10 pick. And I think one of the things we'll look back on with Brian Kelly's tenure is I think they messed up Harold Perkins as well. I think they moved him around a little too much. They got greedy, and they similar to what I mentioned with Garrett Nussmeier. I know he was hurt, but the point I was trying to make, in addition to Nussmeier being hurt, I think they tried to take the gunslinger out of him. And I think the Chiefs and Andy Reid and Mahomes will get the gunslinger back out of Nussmeier. I'll be interested to see if the Atlanta Falcons can unlock what's clearly inside and within Harold Perkins Jr. Because I think he's a first round talent who you're getting in the sixth round because the last 2 years wasn't that great. Had the injury a couple years ago, but I think there's a really good player in there. I'll be interested to see if they can unlock that. Uh, the Carolina Panthers are a team I actually wanted to highlight as well. My brain's been going all over the place. I forgot to mention them. Shout out Big Nate, keep pounding. We talked about Monroe Freeling. His mom's a yoga instructor, but I really like what they did day two, day three, going out and getting Lee Hunter from that Cody Campbell NIL money, Texas Tech defensive line, getting him on the interior of that D line, and then going out and getting Chris Brazzell in the third round. I thought was a great business for them. Chris Brazzell started his career at Tulane, goes to Tennessee. This past year at Tennessee, he was a joy to watch. There might have been a couple of factors that contributed to him going in round three, but in round three, incredible value. If they can unlock that, he adds a dimension to that offense that the Panthers haven't had. Um, Listen, he can go. He's one of those guys, rare combination of size and speed. Being a 6'4" guy that can fly down the field like that and then just go make big plays. I like that pick a lot. And then Will Lee the third in the fourth round. I thought Will Lee the third was one of the best corners in the entire SEC and in the entire draft. Getting him in the fourth round, I think, is remarkable value. Sam Hecht in the fifth round is a guy who, if he cleans up a couple of things, there's enough there where he can even be a starter for them. And then Zakee Wheatley as well is a guy I think will be a productive player for them relative to the value of where they got him in the fifth round. The Chicago Bears, we mentioned them, Dylan Dineman. Uh, they ended up taking Xavier Thomas out of LSU in the third round. Xavier Thomas he's a quick guy, started his career at Mississippi State. I'll be interested to see what Ben Johnson will do with him. And then Malik Muhammad, a guy out of Texas, going in the fourth round, incredible talent. Other factors maybe lend to him going in the fourth round, but it's worth the stab in the fourth round. The Cincinnati Bengals. I'm a big Cassius Howell guy. I'll put that on record. I know I didn't highlight them, and this is the part where I'll say just because maybe the team didn't stand out doesn't mean there aren't players that stand out. As we've been kind of running through this, like we mentioned, maybe certain teams that we've done so far. But yeah, Cassius Howell is a guy I really like. Takario Davis in the third round. If we're having this conversation a year or two ago, Takario Davis is maybe one of those guys we're thinking he could be round one, round two. He goes in the third round. There's enough talent within there. He's got the size. He's a big time, big size corner. He's 6'3". If they can tap into that, he can definitely be a player for them that we'll look back on and say, how did they get him in the third round? But that's an upside swing for sure. And then going out getting a guy like Colby Young in the fourth round. I'll mention a couple of undrafted guys they got as well that actually I think stood out to me even more. The Dallas Cowboys, we mentioned them earlier. They traded up one spot. They got Caleb Downs. We talked a lot about them on day one. They also took Malachi Lawrence, who I liked a lot. Didn't really do a whole lot in day two and day three that moved me. They did add a guy like Jay Barham out of Michigan, Drew Shelton out of Penn State, LT Overton out of Alabama, Devin Moore out of Florida. These are solid picks. Worth mentioning, but in the tier of where we're listing them, the Caleb Downs and Malachi Lawrence. That's why I like to say it's a 3 round thing. But similar to what we'll talk about with the undrafted guys, they all have an undrafted guy I'll highlight as well. And then they got Anthony Smith out of ECU in the seventh round. It's a solid flyer there as well. Taking a chance on him. I like that pick a lot, actually. I think that might be my favorite pick that they made outside of the first round. The Denver Broncos didn't make a ton of selections. They did have a very rare thing where they had the last 2 picks of the draft, so everybody knows Mr. Irrelevant, which I don't know why they call it that. I know why, but you don't normally see a team with the last 2 picks, so they got the opportunity to determine who was going to be quote unquote Mr. Irrelevant. So they took Dallin Bentley with the second to last pick of the draft, and then they took Red Murdoch out of Buffalo. Ironically, I think Red Murdoch out of Buffalo is going to be a steal for them. This is a guy who's the all-time leader in college football in forced fumbles. I think he's going to make the team. Jonah Coleman out of Washington. I'll be very interested to see what Sean Payton does with him. Him and RJ Harvey are going to complement each other perfectly. And then Justin Jolly out of NC State was another tight end who had a little bit of a, there's a little bit there that I think Sean Payton's gonna be able to unlock. I would keep an eye on that. The Detroit Lions, another team, didn't make a ton of selections. We talked about them. They added Blake Miller on the O line. Keith Abney out of Arizona State. They took Kendrick Law out of Kentucky. Another one of those Texas Tech D linemen, and Skylar Gill Howard. Not a spectacular draft by any means, but not a bad draft. It's just, it didn't stand out as much as maybe others did. The Green Bay Packers didn't have a ton of picks, but I actually think this is one of those that, even though it didn't make the initial wave of teams that stood out, they did make a couple of picks that did stand out. So they're kind of in that middle tier where maybe a lot of quality picks, maybe not a ton of quantity, but a lot of quality. Brandon Cisse out of South Carolina, getting him in the second round, I think was great value. A guy in Danny Denise Sutton out of Penn State. This was a guy heading into the year. We mentioned his running back teammates, Singleton and Allen. similar story. Maybe if we're having this conversation a year ago, we're thinking maybe day one, day two. He goes day three. Delmonte Jackson in the sixth round, I think is great value. And then my guy Trey Smack, the kicker out of Florida. I love me some Trey Smack, and I think he could be a really great kicker in the NFL. We mentioned a team we did not mention, the two Los Angeles teams, the Chargers and the Rams. We'll start with the Chargers. We talked a little bit about them on day one, taking Akeem Messidor out of Miami. They honestly made a couple of really, really interesting picks. I think Jay Slaughter in the second round. I think he'll be a perfect fit for that offensive line. I think he'll plug in right away. And then on day three, taking Brennan Thompson. Brennan Thompson's a Mike McDaniel pick. If Jake Slaughter and Akeem Messidor are Harbaugh picks, Brennan Thompson's a Mike McDaniel pick. This Brennan Thompson dude can fly. If he's not the fastest player in the draft, I mean, he's up there for sure. He's a blur. I'll be interested to see him, with the already really exciting young supporting cast of complementary pieces that they've got in the skilled positions. So overall, solid draft there. And then the Rams, a lot will be made about Ty Simpson. I'll leave that for future conversations with other people. With the stars of the Unfiltered Report. But we mentioned the Ohio State tight end, Kaz Merrick out of Ohio State. The other tight end that they got coming out of Ohio State who transferred from Purdue, Max Clare, I think is a worthy stab by them. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up plugging and playing for them. And then C.J. Daniels, a guy who played. He was at Liberty. He played at LSU 2 seasons ago. This past season at Miami, had arguably the catch of the year this past season in the first game of the year against Notre Dame. I think C.J. Daniels is a solid player, and them getting him in round six, I would keep an eye on him as well. The Minnesota Vikings, I will highlight a couple of players there. Jake Golday in the second round, and then Dominic Orange out of Iowa State. I wouldn't be surprised if one or both of those players make an impact for them. And then Jacoby Thomas in the third round could be an interesting player. Charles Demings out of Stephen F. Austin, and then the one that I really like for them, Damon Claiborne in the sixth round. I'm a big Damon Claiborne guy. That guy can move. He's shifty, productive running back out of Wake Forest. The New England Patriots. A lot's been made about the Patriots. Obviously, they were the team that took Baron Morton in the seventh round. I thought they had a okay draft. It wasn't the greatest draft in the world. It wasn't the worst draft in the world. I think Jam Miller in the seventh round definitely stood out to me though. The New Orleans Saints. Who dat? Haven't mentioned the Saints. I made my thoughts about Jordan Tyson well known. David, everybody else on that bandwagon. I think Kellen Moore's going to have a blast with him, but I really love that they added Bryce Lance out of North Dakota State as well. Trey Lance's brother. He can really take the top off of defense. Really good player. And then Barryon Brown out of LSU, big time return guy. He'll be a special teams guy. Might not have a ton of catches, but I think Kellen Moore will find ways to get him the football as well. Oscar Delp out of Georgia. I think Kellen Moore will have a lot of fun with him as well. And the other Georgia guy, Christian Miller, on the defensive side of the ball. A lot was made about Sonny Styles and him going to the Commanders, and his brother Lorenzo Styles Jr. goes in the fifth round. And I like the TJ Hall pick in the seventh round, and we'll talk about some of their undrafted guys. But all in all, I think this is definitely the most optimistic that the Saints have looked since the Breeze days. I think Kellen Moore's going to be there as long as he wants to be there. He's the coach of the present. He's the coach of the future. That's my guy right there. And I think it's gonna be a very interesting year for the New Orleans Saints because I think there's gonna be, for the first time in quite a while, there's gonna be some expectations there for them to maybe make a run for the division slowly but surely. So keep an eye out for Who Dat Nation. I don't want to get too excited, but they're not far off. The Super Bowl champion, Seattle Seahawks. We mentioned Jadarian Price on day one. They went out and got Bud Clark, one of my favorite defensive prospects coming into the draft on round two. He's a guy born to play for the Seattle Seahawks on that defense, Mike McDonald. We mentioned a lot about the Arkansas Razorbacks and their defense. They did have a couple of draftable players on the defensive side of the ball, Julian Neal being one of them. I think he's a solid player. Bo Stevens out of Iowa on the offensive line. But the guy I really want to highlight that they drafted outside of Bud Clark is Emmanuel Henderson out of Kansas. This is a guy who started his career at Alabama, transfers over to Kansas. He could take the top off of defense. Look no further than the Cincinnati game. 5 catches for 214 yards. He had a 93-yard catch in that game. This guy can fly. He might not be the kind of guy who'll go out there and catch 12 passes in the game, but he's the kind of guy who can get you 5 catches for 214 yards in the game. Malik and I, we talked about the San Francisco 49ers the other day. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a lot. We talked about Ruben Bain, David Big Ron. We'll see with the production versus the arm length. We'll see who wins on that side of the coin there. But I do want to highlight their third round selection out of Georgia State, Ted Hurst. That guy's a baller. Their wide receiver room's already great. You add that guy into what's already a great room. You can never have too much talent at any position, and this is the perfect example of that. Don't be surprised if Ted Hurst ends up being an absolute steal for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And then last but not least, the Washington Commanders. We mentioned Sonny Styles, but round 3, Antonio Williams. I like that pick a lot. And then we mentioned Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen. They took Katron Allen round 6. And then they were the team that took Ethan Kaliakamanis out of Rutgers in the 7th round, which he'll be a backup quarterback in the NFL, but it's a big accomplishment for him to get drafted. So before we wrap this up, I will go to the undrafted free agents, and I will run through that. We'll start with the Arizona Cardinals. I thought them getting Trey Wallace was an incredible undrafted signing. Malik and I talked about their draft. I mentioned Dishwan Stribling, who played at Ole Miss this past season. I honestly did not think that there was that big of a gap between Dishwan Stribling and Harrison Wallace III. Trey Wallace, I thought Trey Wallace should have been drafted. He was incredibly productive this past year at Ole Miss. He started his career at Penn State. I think he's got a good shot at making that team. Him and Reggie Virgil, I think, will both be interesting to follow this season. And then gives Carson Beck some targets for those preseason developmental reps as well. The Atlanta Falcons, we'll run through there. Cash Jones was a guy at Georgia. I remember him. I won't really highlight too many of the Atlanta Falcons players. Vinny Anthony II, however, was a guy who got invited to the Senior Bowl. There are some people who definitely are higher on Vinny Anthony than others. But as an undrafted free agent, I think Vinny Anthony would be the one that stands out for me with the Atlanta Falcons. Baltimore Ravens. We mentioned Diego Pavia, a Heisman finalist, comes over, changes the culture at Vanderbilt, but is definitely a controversial figure. Not a lot of people, there are a lot of people who don't like him. There are a lot of people who do. A lot's been made about his age, his size, whatnot, but there's no denying the production and the personality part. Make what you want about that, but I think the Baltimore Ravens getting him in the room, I like that. I like just giving him a chance, and they also added a guy, Big Joe out of UConn. 1 interception this past season, 28 touchdowns, 7th-year quarterback. And they're going to let those two guys battle it out for the 3rd quarterback spot. I mean, I'll bet on Diego Pavia in that instance. I think Pavia's got the inside track at that 3rd quarterback slot. But it'll be interesting to see those two guys compete. And then Diego Pounds, getting him on the offensive line, I thought he really had a good shot to get drafted. So him not getting drafted really stood out to me. The Buffalo Bills going out and getting Desmond Reed. This is a guy started his career at Western Carolina, transfers to Pitt, incredibly productive at Pitt. This past season didn't really go the way that he wanted, but the production's there. If you look at the tape 2 years ago, listen, not the biggest guy by any means, but this guy's a baller. We mentioned Skylar Bell earlier. I think Desmond Reed's got a good chance to make the team and be an impact player for them. I would keep an eye on that. The Carolina Panthers, Haynes King and the guy we'll mention in a little bit, his running back, Jamal Haynes. It felt like both of those guys were at Georgia Tech for about 15 years. Um, but Haynes King is one of those guys I think has a solid chance to be a backup at the very least at the NFL level. It was a great college quarterback. Uh, you know, so I would like to shout out Haynes King because whatever happens with his pro career, he was a really fun college quarterback to watch. And then also signing Kobe Prentice. I would keep an eye on that. I'm not sure if he'll make the team or not. Chicago Bears, Miller Moss coming over from Louisville. Jeff Brom's done a great job. Uh, I would highlight a guy maybe like Omari Kelly, the wide receiver, maybe see if he can make the team. Cincinnati Bengals, we mentioned just now, Haynes King. They signed Jamal Haynes. Noah Thomas is a guy. They drafted Colby Young. I think Noah Thomas might actually make the team. Never really had a ton of production. His best year was at A&M. He had about 500 yards. Transferred to Georgia this past season. But there's no denying that the physical traits are there. It's just about trying to tap into that a little bit. I don't know if he'll make the team. Odds aren't necessarily the greatest, but that's a player that I think the eye test. I always kept an eye on him when he was at A&M those first 3 years. The Cleveland Browns, we talked a lot about them earlier. Um, Aaron Anderson out of LSU, Xavier Thomas, and Barryon Brown were the two that got drafted. Honestly, I would even say that Aaron Anderson might have been the best of those three as a receiver. Started his career at Alabama. I like Aaron Anderson arguably the most out of those three guys. I think he's the kind of player if he gets if he gets a shot, I wouldn't be surprised. They also added Cole Wilson at the receiver position, Tyreek Sapp on the D line, Logan Fano, Spencer's brother, and then T.J. Harden as well. This is a guy who started his career, bounced around a little bit, played at UCLA, played at SMU. There's a little bit of production there as well. Um, Dallas Cowboys, one of those undrafted tight ends I mentioned, Michael Trigg out of Baylor. I'm surprised nobody took a chance on him in the draft. I think he's got a chance to make the team. He's absolutely massive human being. Had a pretty good year for Baylor as well. Definitely the best of his collegiate career. Denver Broncos, Joseph Manjack the fourth. We'll see. I don't know. Detroit Lions, however, we mentioned that Chase Daniel mode. I think Luke Altmaier is going to be like the Chase Daniel of 2026, like the new generation. I think Luke Altmaier is going to be one of those guys who will probably not start many games. Will probably just play preseason games. Will never be looked at as a franchise guy or even maybe like a Garrett Nussmeier, where we're saying like keep an eye on him maybe as a long term seventh round guy. Luke Altmaier goes undrafted. I'm not really surprised that he goes undrafted, but I really do think that Luke Altmaier is going to be one of those guys. You look back, he might never throw a pass in the NFL, and he'll be one of those guys who'll hold a clipboard for 10 years and maybe find himself coaching one day as well. You never know. Um, Green Bay Packers, the Packers love their athletic quarterbacks with tools and that developmental role. They take a flyer on Kyron Drones. I think the way people talk about Taylor Green is the way that they probably should talk about Kyron Drones. The athleticism's there. Not really the greatest quarterback, but that's just my 2 cents on it. Uh, they added two guys at the receiver position, undrafted, R.J. Maryland and J. Michael Sturdivant. Don't know if they'll make the team, but there's a lot of press made about them not taking a receiver. It feels like every year. Didn't really need to. I like what they did, regardless in the draft. We'll keep coming down here. The Indianapolis Colts, Wu Pig Shui, Raylan Sharp was a guy. I haven't heard anything about Omega Blake up until now. Maybe that's changed. I'm surprised he hasn't ended up anywhere, but Raylan Sharp lands with the Colts. The Jaguars, I think Joey Aguilar is one of those guys. I wasn't expecting him to get drafted, but I like watching him throw the ball, to be honest with you. I think he's better than he probably gets credit for. I liked watching him at App State, and I thought he was a joy to watch this past year at Tennessee, and that deserves a shout out. We'll see if he can make the team. Last year, they added Seth Hennigan as an undrafted free agent. I liked him a lot out of Memphis. I feel similarly about Joey Aguilar. Whether he ever throws a pass or not in the league doesn't change how I feel about Joey Aguilar. Jamari Taylor, however, out of Virginia, older running back, but I would keep an eye on him. I think he's got a shot at making a team. And then Trevor Pena at receiver had a really good year at Syracuse a couple years ago. Didn't really have the same level of success at Penn State, but I would keep an eye on him. With the Chiefs added a guy in Jaden Ott. Jaden Ott, as a freshman at Cal, was spectacular. As a sophomore, wasn't much worse, but his last 2 years in college, especially this past year at Oklahoma, didn't really pan out the way that he would have wanted. But like I said earlier, you've seen him do it once, you can see him do it again. Terrion Stewart as well is a fun little player out of the MAC. And then EJ Smith, Emmett Smith's kid. Um, but yeah, the Jaden Knott would be the one I would highlight of those running backs. The Raiders added Sawyer Robertson. They drafted Mendoza. Obviously, I think Sawyer Robertson's another of those guys. I would not be surprised in the slightest if he finds a way to latch on in the league as a backup quarterback. Roman Hemby is a guy. Honestly, surprised that he didn't get drafted. Similar with Chase Roberts. I think both of those guys have a shot at making the team. And then Xavier Story Jr. is a guy we mentioned on that Arkansas defense. It was a bad defense, but I thought he had a shot at getting drafted, and I was a little surprised to see that he didn't get drafted as well. Um, Isaiah World for the Chargers. He's a worldly sized man. He's massive. I would highlight him as well. Uh, I would also Miami Dolphins. We talked a lot about them earlier. I would highlight Anthony Hankerson, Le'Veon Moss, Romello Brinson, Donovan McCulley. I think any of those guys got a shot at making the team. I always like Le'Veon Moss, especially at A&M. Donovan McCulley is a guy who started off as a quarterback, ended up changing positions as a wide receiver. I would keep an eye on a couple of those guys. Minnesota Vikings, Dylan Bell. Didn't get drafted, might not make the team, but he was always an interesting player I like to keep an eye on. Luke Weissong was a guy I watched at New Mexico a couple of years as well. Probably won't make the team, but deserves a shout out. New Orleans Saints, C.J. Donaldson came on really strong at West Virginia when he first started his career. Had some really big performances. Um, his career probably didn't pan out in the latter half, similar to Jaden Hunt, but this is a big running back. He's a massive running back. He's got great size. I think Kellen Moore could do wonders with this guy if he ends up making a team. So I would keep an eye out on that. The Giants getting Dominic Zvada, kicker out of Michigan. Similar to Trace Mack, I feel similarly about Dominic Zvada. I think he could be an NFL kicker for sure. The New York Jets added a couple of guys. Colin Lacey that I thought had a shot at getting drafted and didn't. I liked the DT Sheffield a couple years ago as well when he was at North Texas, especially. Probably won't make the team, but it's one of those smaller, quick wide receivers that's always fun to watch. Philadelphia Eagles, we talked a little bit about them. I had mentioned those tight ends that I liked. I mentioned Eli Stowers and Tanner Kozio and a couple of these other guys. Daquan Wright was a guy that I could not believe did not get drafted out of Ole Miss. Um, you don't see guys that big move like that in pads. And I'm honestly shocked. And we talked about Michael Trick as well. I'm shocked that no one took Daquan Wright. Him landing with the Eagles, similar theme. The fact that they got him and Eli Stowers is remarkable, and they didn't even have to draft Daquan Wright. I think there's a good chance that he makes the team. And then Deontay Lawson out of Alabama, I think there's a good chance that he'll make that team as well. Lake McCree to the Steelers. Oh, you know what? I realized just now we didn't talk about the Steelers and their draft. The scatterbrain, I realized that. Listen, they took Drew Aller, similar to how I felt about Carson Beck and Klubnik. Although I will say that out of those three guys, I think Drew Aller's got the best shot and he's in the best situation. So I will keep an open mind with Drew Aller as compared to the other two guys. That's the one caveat. But I think the Steelers, honestly, outside of that, I think they had a pretty solid draft. Max Ihenacho, listen, he's a violent guy, on the offensive line. I think the tape will really stand out. Gennings Dunker was a guy I think was born to play for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Jeremy Bernard was a great pick. I think he's going to plug in right away. The Steelers always, it feels like they make great day two wide receiver picks every year, day three guys. And this is just another one in a long line of Steelers, day two, day three wide receivers. Jeremy Bernard, outstanding. And then shout out to Elon Heidenreich out of Navy, gets drafted in the 7th round This is a guy this past season over 1,400 yards. Surprisingly, you look at Navy triple option over 900 yards receiving this past season for them. I think he's got a really good shot at making the team as well. San Francisco 49ers. Similar to how I felt about Noah Thomas, Wesley Grimes is always a guy that I was fascinated by. The production never really matched, but I always felt like there was something more than the production had in there. Um, just kind of rolling down the list here. Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Uh, Jalen Daniels out of Kansas. Similar opinion. Might never play a down in the NFL, but shout out to him as a college quarterback. He was a joy to watch when he was healthy, and it's a shame he could never really stay healthy until this past season. They also added Chandler Morris. Had a really good year at Virginia. I wouldn't be surprised if one of those guys makes the team. I'm not sure which one. I'll be interested to see how that plays out. But both kind of deserve a shout out. And then Eric Rivers as well was a guy. I don't know necessarily if he'll make the team. Probably not. But he was an interesting guy to watch in the ACC. Tennessee Titans. Quarterback Caden Salter, the same thing. I don't think he'll make the team. Tyron Montgomery, however, is a guy I would like to shout out. I think Tyron Montgomery's got an outside shot at making the Tennessee Titans roster. And then last but not least, the Washington Commanders. I think Robert Henry Jr. at a UTSA, a little bit older. But listen, this is a guy who had 177 yards in the season opener against A&M, over 1,000 yards this season. I think him and Katron Allen both have a shot. Obviously, I think Allen will make the team. I think Henry can make the team as well. And they could both be figures in that Washington Commanders running game. Anyways, I apologize for yammering so much. This has been the Unfiltered Report. I hope you enjoyed our NFL draft recap, undrafted free agent recap. Stay tuned for our episode that's about to come right now with my guy D. We got lots we're going to get into. We got more episodes coming tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that as well. It's been the Unfiltered Report. My name is Ryan. We'll talk soon.